Welcome to another episode of Couch Catechism. I'm your host, Michael Obeid from Voracious Media. If you're just tuning in now on Facebook, please like as well as share. We are going to be speaking about a special topic tonight. This is also going to be shown on YouTube later on, so don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, Voracious Media. Now, I've got a very special guest tonight, Fr Dan McCaughan. How are you, Father?
Very well, thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Father, can you just let everybody know where you're currently now the parish administrator at...
St Patrick's at Sutherland. So I'm Fr Dan McCaughan. I'm the administrator of St Patrick's Parish in Sutherland, in a region of Sydney that is simply known as God's country, the Sutherland Shire. It is the best part of Sydney. Once you live there, you never want to leave. So I consider myself very blessed to be God's minister in God's own country.
And did you want to give anyone a special shout out, especially?
I'd give a special shout out to anyone who might be watching from the Sutherland Shire, but if anyone happens to be watching from St Pat's College, Sutherland, then a big shout out to you.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. Now, Father, I wanted to have you on the show just to talk about pretty much anything, but we've got a very special topic that we're going to be speaking about tonight. Would you like to tell us what we're going to be talking about?
Sure. Well, it's a topic that became very close to my heart, because it's something that touched my family, and that was I wanted to learn how to be the best priest possible in dealing with the issue of same-sex attraction. Okay. And it sort of that came out when I was in the seminary and approaching ordination, and one of my brothers, who I love very dearly and get on with very well, came out to the family that saying, well, he was gay. Okay. And I was like, oh, well, how do I go about? And I suppose when it hit close to home, I suppose I then realised, you know what? I know, apart from the obvious, I know next to nothing about what makes someone with same-sex attraction tick. And I wanted to know, well, how might that have developed? And I wanted to see if researching that would help me to be a better priest. Yep. And then even first and foremost, just a better brother. Okay. To understand where my brother, but more broadly speaking, anyone who might have same-sex attraction might be coming from. Okay. And how is this going to make me more effective in dealing pastorally with them? And
how were your studies? How did you find it? What did you learn?
Well, it was a big topic, and basically what happened was when I was in my final year in the seminary, well, actually I was in Rome, and I was doing my license at the John Paul II Institute for Marriage and Family, and I was talking with the professors, and we had to do our thesis, our license thesis, and they were saying, what would you want what would you like to research? And I said, well, I wanted to know a bit more about this issue. And they immediately jumped on it, and they were like, yes, please. Oh, wow. Can you write a thesis on this topic? Okay. So I said, okay, right, well, it's obviously going to be mutually beneficial. Yep. So I went ahead and started researching, and it was, strictly speaking, my paper was not even though it's a theological institute, it was not a theological paper. Mm-hmm. It incorporates theology, but yep. If anything, it's more of a psychological paper. Okay. With some pastoral applications coming out of it as a result. Okay. So the name of my paper, yep, was the Genesis of Same-Sex Attraction and Approaches to Pastoral and Psychological Care. Okay. I suppose that was the overall theme. Yep. And I looked at three main areas. It was broken into three chapters. Firstly, an overview of sexual identity, mm-hmm, in itself. Then specifically the meat of the thesis was chapter 2, which was looking at the genesis of same-sex attraction, and in particular in males. Okay. The main reason being is that there's a lot more research done on same-sex attraction in males than there is in females. It may come as a bit of a surprise, but actually homosexuality has double the rate of incidence in guys than it does in girls. Okay. Men are, if you like, are twice as likely to end up with same-sex attraction than women. Okay. And so there's a lot more. Well, there's a lot more written, okay, on it. And then the final chapter of the thesis was looking more at more perhaps ways we might approach caring for psychologically, pastorally people.
Okay, now for those people that are tuning in and for people that are watching at the moment, maybe some of them might like to know, as an introduction, where the church stands on same-sex attraction.
Yes.
Did you want to start with that, or did you want to start with something else? Like
No, that's all right. I mean, well, look, I mean, simply put, I mean, it's the church's teaching on it has always been, very simply, that as human beings, as we're made male and female,
Yep.
and that there is a very deep meaning embedded in the fact that the human race has been split in two.
Yep.
Into two sexes that are mutually complementary. And I remember sitting in class at the John Paul II Institute, and one of the professors was talking, and he said something, and he was quoting John Paul II, but I remember it just really hit me.
Yep.
He said, "My body as a man makes no sense until it is seen in the light of the female body."
Wow, okay.
And it's only in the light of the female body that the male body makes full sense, and vice versa.
Okay.
The female body finds the fullness of its meaning
Yep.
in the male body.
Okay.
That there is, and it's in that mutual complementarity of the sexes, that in that concrete way, that we are also, that's also fundamental to how we're made in the image and likeness of God.
Okay.
Because in understanding, if we go into teaching on marriage and family, etc., I
Yep.
mean, if we want to get more specifically theological,
Yep.
the greatest icon of the Trinity
Yep.
that exists in the world,
Yep.
even more than the priesthood, and the greatest icon of the Trinity, of the interior life of God that exists, is the family.
Okay.
Mother, father, children.
Yep.
Where if you look at the Trinity, you have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Three persons united in eternal, infinite, life-giving love.
Wow.
A communion of life-giving love.
Okay.
Right? And then if you look at us as men and women, called to form lifelong communions of life-giving love.
Wow.
And so it is the greatest. It's why the family, especially the Christian family, is an icon of God.
Okay.
And which is why mums and dads have that very special vocation. And when you do baptisms, you're really trying to reinforce that to the parents, that as mums and dads, they are the face of God for their children.
Okay.
So that's very important. So anything in that area of sexuality that doesn't speak that truth
Yep.
has got something fundamentally missing.
Yep.
It's got something fundamentally missing, and it's trying to fulfill a very deep desire, that's placed in all our hearts in a way in which it can never reach its proper fulfillment.
Okay.
So
what you're saying is that God, from all eternity, when he creates human beings, he has an intention for them. He wants them to live out their lives in and through their sexuality as well. So when he intends you, like as part of you as a person, your maleness is important. And that's an expression of your sexuality. And the same would be for a woman. And so part of their identities is also their sexualities.
yes, absolutely. I mean, sexuality is a fundamental part of our identity. It's important to say, though, it's not the wholeness of our identity, in the sense it's not absolutely everything that goes to make us up. But if you like, it's the prism through which everything is kind of seen. Like, I mean, even genetically, right down to the very last cell in your body and in my body is a XY chromosome.
Okay.
Like, I mean, we are male down to the last cell.
Yep.
That's just who we are, and we didn't choose that. We were given it,
Yep.
and it's a gift.
Yep.
I think that's also another thing, is that we need to see the sexuality, the sex that we've been given, male or female, as a gift.
As a gift.
You know, I think that's a really important.
And going back to when you were speaking about the Trinity and the Trinity of persons, God also would have had an intention for the second person of the Blessed Trinity being incarnate as a male. Like, that was probably the best or probably the fitting expression of how the second person of the Blessed Trinity could become incarnate as a male. Would that help in our understanding as well?
I mean, yes. I mean, if you think if God's going to go to all the effort of becoming one of us, then it's not an accident that he comes as a man. It's a very, very deliberate choice. Mind you, also, I mean, from all eternity, he's also wanted a woman for a mother.
That's right.
Which is why now Our Lady is as much a part of that eternal plan as our Lord is. And so already you have that.
Okay, awesome. So now with your studies and with your paper, your introduction was on the genesis of that kind of formed like the main heart of the thesis, and having just talked about the family as like an icon of the Trinity, etc., and being designed to be that communion of love. One of the in doing my research into all of this, the one thing that seemed to come out, did come out over and over again, while the genesis of a same-sex attraction in each individual person is unique to each person, like everyone has their own story and their set of circumstances, etc., that went into it. There are some very, very key patterns, which are overwhelmingly common amongst especially guys, and I'm going to really concentrate on guys, not because the same-sex attraction in females is any less important. It's just simply because of the research.
It's just because of the research and the data. There's far more on guys. But very often, same-sex attraction, its development in guys, had something to do with, and in fact, almost always, went back to something that went wrong very early on in the relationship dynamic between that particular child and their mother and father. So what a lot of the psychologists, especially that have worked in this area, and there's a couple of big names. One in particular is a guy called Dr. Joseph Nicolosi, he's now, I believe, gone to God, but was a very prominent writer and therapist. And he would talk about what he would call the triadic family structure: father, mother, child. All right. So let's take it from the beginning. So mum and dad conceive, they have a baby boy. Baby boy is born. Now, all babies, be they boy or girl, doesn't matter, when they're born, are completely attached to mum. And so they should be. Because we learn from our mums perhaps the most primordial and yet important lesson, that mum, just by being mum, incarnates for the baby a sense of the goodness of its existence. I mean, just by mum being mum, she says to the child, it is a good thing that you exist. In the way God has designed women to be, especially as mothers, they are an incarnate yes to the being and the worth of the child. I mean, they're able to meet all of baby's needs, biological needs. I mean, they're also being better designed for holding and snuggling baby. I mean, not that dad's not as good, but I mean, like, he's probably a little less comfortable. He's got and on that front, in terms of biologically meeting the baby's needs, dad's a bit useless. So he's not equipped in certain areas. So and that's a good thing. It's a good thing. Why? Because as men,
well, I think it's a good thing because I don't have to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning to breastfeed.
But I mean, the fact is that as guys, as men, that ability to give that kind of tenderness, it's not that we can't be tender, but it's just that women have got it more. They do. They just do have it more. And I mean, it's important to note too that the privilege of carrying a child in your womb and being so physically united to another human being for such an extended period of time is a privilege that is denied every guy.
That's true. No matter what.
No matter what. It's a privilege that's denied every guy. It is a gift given only to women. And too often, the media and movies and Hollywood want to downplay and poo-poo that as to how beautiful that is.
And what do you think? They want to make it out like the woman's suffering and
that it's just pure suffering and that it's all. I mean, God, look, I mean, I've watched my mum, my sister-in-law, I get morning sickness. Well, it's not. I'm not going to pretend it. I'm not for a sec for all the women who might be watching. No, I'm not.
But just to give everybody a bit of a background, you come from a
big family. The eldest of 11 kids.
11 kids. There you go. Well, okay.
So I've seen. Look, and I saw my mum plenty of times.
Yeah.
Go with over the kitchen sink in the morning, sort of letting rip.
So, wow, yeah. So she had the morning sickness for a lot of you?
She did.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if she had it for every pregnancy, but I certainly remember her multiple times with the morning sickness.
Yeah, my wife's had the morning sickness. She goes all the way.
Yeah.
So
okay, look. So having said all of that, I mean
it's beautiful.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is.
When it's all said and done, it is a beautiful thing, and us guys can only stand in admiration
and just watch
and wonder. At the women in our lives, when they carry children. So
absolutely.
But so once baby's born, baby's totally identified with mum, and it should be. Doesn't matter, boy or girl, totally identified with mum.
Yeah.
But then as they develop, little by little, the first thing that baby starts to develop is an awareness that they're a separate being from mum.
Okay.
That they are somehow, because when they're first born, they're almost not even aware that that they bear anything separate from mum. Mind you, they've been inside mum for 9 months, right? But then as they become more in tune with the fact that they're outside the womb, that they are physically separate from mum, then they become more and more aware that they themselves are an independent, separate being, and it's sort of, and I mean, mind you, we're talking in the very first months of life. Okay, this is like right off the.
They become aware.
Okay, very early on, and it's even from this point, even from like within the first 6 months, this is where the voice of dad starts to become very important. Especially if it's a boy, but mind you, also very important if it's a girl too.
Oh, wow.
But just while we're focusing on boys, the voice of dad becomes very, very important because now he becomes another voice. It's a loving voice.
Yep.
It's another person, but it's a different voice to that of mum. It has a different resonance. It's got a different tone. And it evokes a different response in the child. Even from the very beginning, dad's voice already triggers something in the child's brain that's different from what mum does.
Okay.
And quickly the child learns to distinguish between mum's voice and dad's voice.
Okay.
And then as the male child sort of becomes more and more self-aware, and especially now, even like now in their first 18 months of life.
Yep.
Especially when they're a boy, they start to become very quickly aware that their difference from mum actually is a similarity to dad. They already start to realize that that there is something that I have in common, even though they don't know anything about, sex or gender or anything like that. Even from these first months, within the first 18 months, the boy is already becoming aware that he actually has something in common. He can't articulate it, but he's already sensing that with this second voice that I've got in my life, that we've got something in common.
Okay.
All right.
Now, sorry to stop you here, and I don't want to try to throw curveballs at you, but do you remember from the studies and the research, how do the people doing the research, how do they find this stuff out? Like, how do they know that there's, do they sense for responses? How do they test for it?
A whole range of things. I mean, there's plenty of pediatric, there's been lots of pediatric research on looking at different stimuli and also the effects of interactions with male or female parents, and then even dealing with children or adults who maybe battling same-sex attraction, getting them to go back. To their which actually we may get to when we're talking about perhaps therapies and things like that. It always involves going back to the very beginning.
From what they can
the earliest
remember.
thing that they can remember.
Okay.
All right, and their very first memories of interacting with dad or with mum and things like that.
Okay.
Having said that, they realise that there's there's a similarity with dad. Now, this is the thing. If mum and dad have a good, loving relationship, it's amazing. Like the boy will see that because of mum's love for dad, he will get that dad is a safe person to start orienting towards.
Okay.
and to start moving over. And he will very quickly start looking from now within the first 2 years of life already be looking for approval from who he sees as the alpha male in his life. It's so funny, even as human beings, men are still pack oriented and we always look for the alpha. And so for us, it's always what we really want by alpha, we mean dad. Who is our father figure? And so we look for it. And so so the boy will look for it. He'll want it, and then if he's got a good dad or whatever, and his father starts to affirm him. Give him encouragement. Help him.
What age are we talking around now?
We're still even within the first 2 years. From there. I mean, now going on like from the first 2 to even 5 years is all really important. But even from even really 18 months on. Look, actually, to be honest, looking at my brother, and he's got 3 little boys. Right. And I remember his eldest son, so my eldest nephew, who's only about 4 now. But even from the age of 1. He was, or had already decided that dad was the man he wanted to hang out with. Although he didn't like mum, he loved his mum. But if he had a choice, if he saw 2 parents in the room, bang, he automatically went to dad.
Well, my son is 6 months old, and whenever I come through the door from work, or whenever I wake up, or I've gone to the gym in the morning and I've come home and he's on the bed with mum, whenever he hears my voice or I'm walking into the room, even my wife, Frida, she says to me, "Oh, look, he's looking at you. Can you acknowledge us?" You know what I mean? And I'll be looking at him, and it's almost like he's got this sense of, he knows that I'm there, but he wants my attention. So I'm thinking of all this as you're saying this.
No, and even as I said, even at 6 months, I mean, it starts so early.
Wow,
so early. That's why dads become very, very important. Because the father introduces a new type of love, which is, he's not an incarnate yes to the being of the child in the same way that mum is. If mum gives, as our psychologist in the seminary used to put it, he said, if mum gives the child physical birth, dad has the responsibility of giving their child social birth. And you see, if you dad's love, it's how do you put it? It's massive, it's huge, but dad's love tends to be not to be unconditional in the same way that is usually in a family that dad is the one who establishes the boundaries. These are because if mum says it's a wonderful thing that you exist. I mean, dad absolutely affirms everything that mum says. But dad also has a very sacred responsibility in saying, well, but you haven't just been created to simply exist. You've also been created to be free you have your freedom, and you also have responsibility, and you have to learn how to love, but you also have to learn how to transcend yourself. You have to learn how to go beyond yourself. But in order to do that, you also have to know how to play within these rules. And this is how, and so dad gives the structure and things. And in most families, the discipline of the father is vital. I mean, all you have to do is see how much better boys respond to discipline coming from dad than they might from mum.
That's true.
They might be much more willing to try,
that's true.
To push the envelope a bit more with mum. But if dad comes in and bang says, no, this is the way it's going to be, then but that's already that male to male, that boy to man respect and looking for approval.
That's funny that you say that, because I'm now thinking back on a lot of times when unjustly, now I'm thinking about it, I get frustrated with my wife because it's as though when she asks them not to do something, they tend not to really listen as much as when I do. And sometimes I'll be like, listen, this is what do you just tell them, or what do you just, and automatically thinking that they're going to respond to her the same way that they respond to me. But I'm now starting to think back, and I'm starting to realize that because I'm that father figure, and I've got a different tone of voice and that, it's like they listen to me more than they do with her, but not because
it's not because they love her any less.
It's not because they love her any less, or she's worse at her job. But I think it's just that we have those different roles, and I think I'm seen more as the authoritative figure in the home.
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter. Even when they get adults, there'll always be things, even as adult children, that they will go to your wife to that they won't go to you to, and vice versa.
Yep.
They'll go to you about things, to talk about things for her that they may not go to her for.
Yep.
And even with my own parents, there are some things I'm much more comfortable talking with my dad about and going to, and other things that I would go to mum for, because you know it's just you just realise that this is how you've been shaped. So skipping on. So assuming everything goes well.
Yep.
So the boy he starts to develop. He basically makes a detachment from mum, which is it's not a detachment meaning he loves her less, but he's now detaching himself to make himself, as if you like, more independent, but it also involves an attachment to dad. So if dad's giving him that affirmation, the encouragement and the approval or whatnot, then the boy starts to, then he will probably start going to school, etc. And then very quickly, and this is really important with guys, is the male peer group. Affirmation from male peers, even from primary school onwards. Is very important. And what you'll find is that boys, and I remember going to a co-ed Catholic primary school, and I remember the arguments that we used to have between the boys and the girls. You know, cause about who had it better. And all us boys used to say, we'd say, we got lucky. God made us boys. I remember like when we were 6 or 7, we were already saying, it'd be so boring being a girl. You can't play as much. You don't play as much sport as we do. You don't like getting like, the rough and tumble and being dirty and all that kind of stuff. You're always off playing with your dolls. It's like, how boring, come on. And then the girls, they get all upset. No, what are you kidding me? We love being girls. And, there's no way we'd want to be boys. And then we'd have these great things. Now that was just life, but I look back on that and I go, you know what? That was actually so healthy, because what happens is, and this, you hear that the games of like boy germs and girl germs, and like girls have cooties and all that sort of stuff. Okay, they're silly games, but they actually speak a very important truth. Boys and girls actually, when they're in primary school, especially early primary school, they probably oftentimes will find the other sex a bit icky. And not when and if you were to go to like a 7-year-old boy and say you're a girl, it will automatically trigger a deep emotional response in that boy. He will either find what you say absolutely hilarious and preposterous, and he'll just laugh and go, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard, or he'll get seriously angry. And it's like, well, no, I'm not. I'm not like, that's the most, I remember when I was in primary school, like the most offensive thing you could call me was a girl. I was like, I'm not a girl. Like, boom, you get really upset. And that is really important. Because the guys and the girls, the boys and the girls, need to anchor themselves in their masculinity and their femininity precisely so that they will come back together again when they're older. It's really, really important. They need to have that period of shunning, where they're not in, like when you get like 13-year-old boys. It's healthy. Very healthy. It's very healthy. Like, and you get those boys in early high school, like 13, 14, even up to 15, where, they probably haven't talked to a girl in years. All they do is play sport and or hang around with their friends. Perfectly healthy. It's perfectly healthy because they anchor themselves in that, because then this is what happens. So assuming everything's developed well and normally, then all of a sudden puberty kicks in. Boy starts to become a man. And, so certainly, wakes up a different side of him. And then suddenly that difference that he has been anchoring himself in, now he suddenly sees the opposite sex in a completely different light. Suddenly his gaze is changed. And it's a biological thing. It's also psychological, it's also spiritual. So his gaze on girls or women changes. And because what happens is that now, as I said before, like the male body makes sense in light of the female, etc. But even more than the body, it's the male person makes sense in light of the female person, and vice versa. And what happens is that as puberty kicks in and he develops, suddenly now he is pushed psychologically towards that which he perceives as being other to himself, which is women. You know, suddenly they become attractive, but they become attractive precisely because they're different.
Okay.
Precisely because they're not him.
Wow.
So
they're drawn to that.
They're drawn to the opposite.
To the
John
other.
Paul II would call it like the irreducible otherness of men and women. Like, as a man, I can never take the place of a woman. I can never fill that space that she occupies, and vice versa.
Okay.
You know, they can't replace.
Wow.
You know, that they can't replace each other
Wow.
in that sense.
So this is like built into our DNA, into our structure, into our soul, pretty much almost.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, it is built in there. So and then of course, you know, boy meets girl. You know, they get married, etc., and the whole thing starts again. But what happens when that triadic family structure breaks down?
Okay.
So, and it can do so in many different ways or forms. So, what happens? Say, just take for example, if mum and dad have a really bad relationship. Maybe dad is violent, abusive, and he seems to show disdain.
Is this to mum or to the kid?
Or both. It can be both. It can be both. Or it can just be, I mean, but we'll just say he's to both.
Okay.
All right. We'll take the worst example just to start off with. So just say dad's a brute.
Okay.
All right. Maybe so maybe dad's a brute. He's abusive to mum.
Yep.
And he is either abusive to the kid or is disdainful and ignoring of the boy.
Okay. So
right.
Just doesn't recognize
does
him.
Not recognize him. Does not acknowledge him.
him.
Does not give him the approval that he wants.
The affirmation.
Or he puts him down.
Okay.
You know, when he's trying, and every boy doesn't have to be like through sport or anything like that. I mean, it usually is, but anything like, Daddy, look what I did.
Okay.
You know, that's a really important moment. Like I think dads need to look when their kid comes to them and says, Daddy, look what I did.
Yep.
Those moments of acknowledgement.
Yep.
Loving acknowledgement are key.
Very important.
Key over and over and over again.
Okay.
You know, that they need dad's approval. They need dad's approval. It doesn't mean that approval doesn't mean you don't correct. Mm-hmm. But they do need to constantly know that dad sees them, he hears them, and he loves them. That's vital.
Okay.
So what happens though if the boy finds that every time his masculinity tries to burgeon, like as a little boy, like tries to get the approval, and dad either slaps him down or ignores him or is not interested, then even from maybe say, you know, 3 years old, even like we're talking like this early, a psychological subconscious shame response can be triggered in the boy, meaning that he thinks, oh, every time I try and, you know, get my dad's approval, I get slapped down. And his masculinity, which he's born with or whatever, suddenly he's not articulating this, but this is what he's happening.
It's feeling within him.
It's what he's feeling. Yeah. This is emotionally how it's registering with him.
Yep.
That my masculinity is something to be ashamed of.
Oh, he makes that association.
Yeah, they make even very early.
Far out.
Make that association. My masculinity is something to be ashamed of. That in the sense that not masculinity in and of itself is shameful, but my masculinity is shameful. It can happen really. It can happen really young. The tragedy is that many dads don't even realise that that's the effect that they're having on their boy. So. Wow. And so what does he do?
Yep.
He then makes a defensive detachment from dad. And he goes back to the world that he knows, which is mum. So, because women are safe.
Yep.
Because
they'll give the affirmation?
Well, they might give the affirmation and everything. Or and often what happens too is that if mum and dad don't have a good relationship, then very often mum sort of drags the boy back in and even prevents him from going after dad. You see, it's meant to be like a beautiful push-pull. Sort of the father pulls the boy, if you will, towards him through his affirmations. And mum, because of her loving relationship, she naturally would push the boy towards dad. Okay. Just the way in terms of encouraging, constantly encouraging that bond to be formed. And especially, and if the boy can see, look, mum and dad have a great relationship, well, then dad's always going to be. It's going to further encourage him to go that way. But when that doesn't happen, say the boy retreats back to
mum.
To mum,
Yep.
and you see the reason why women are safe
Yep.
is because they will never challenge his masculinity. They will never demand that he be a man in the way men will.
That will.
This is the thing: is that masculinity is
Yep.
always called out of a boy by other men.
Okay.
It cannot be called out by women. Just as us blokes,
Yep.
we can't call femininity out of a girl.
Out of a girl.
And that's
okay.
only a woman can do that. Only a
Okay.
mother can do that, and
Okay.
other figures, like if she's got like good aunties and things like
Yep.
that, you know, good female role models,
Role
right?
models, yep.
That can
Wow.
that can happen. So, you know, I remember reading when in school, you know, we'd do like Aboriginal studies and
Yep.
stuff, and you know, like the Aboriginal tribes,
Yep.
you know, when the boys hit puberty,
Yep.
the men would take them
Yep.
out into the bush,
Yep.
and they would initiate them.
Yeah.
And you weren't allowed to call yourself a man until you passed these initiation rituals.
That's right.
Which often involved quite some physical trials, often a fair bit of pain, some kind of, you know.
I remember something similar as well. I don't know whether it was in African tribes or Aboriginal tribes, maybe, but I remember that there's like this rite of passing where and it must have been some sort of a rite of passing documentary amongst many different cultures and backgrounds, but this person has to go on a camp, or he has to go fend for himself for a couple of days and then come back, and
then come back, yep.
and he comes back a man, or he has a right to be like seen as a male or part of the tribe because of that.
Yeah, exactly. And that need for men to have some kind of rite of passage, of course, in our modern society, how that plays out is obviously far less structured,
Yep.
you know, or ritualized than it is with, say, a lot of tribes. And obviously, we're not
Yep.
advocating that. You know, you send your kid out there and
let him fend for himself.
Let him fend for himself
3 days.
and hunt lions and tigers with nothing but a little club. You know, like that's not. But
It'll make a man out of him.
You'll make it. Yeah, or he'll wind up dead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which we don't want.
But there is a need though.
Okay.
That becoming a man does involve some kind of self-overcoming.
Okay.
All right.
Some trial.
Some trial.
Yep.
And that is demanded of by other men.
By other men.
Now, you know where this often happens. Obviously not in such a structured way, but it plays out naturally. Is especially in the world of sport.
Oh, yeah.
So in the world of sport, especially team sports.
Okay, I can see that.
Team sports, like, I mean, in Australia, we know, I would experience it quite viscerally because I played rugby my whole life, so
Yep.
it's a real contact sport, and you kind of go to war with your teammates, like you literally like bind together and physically repel the enemy.
Yeah.
Like it's
And I can see this being a good thing, isn't it?
It is a good thing. I mean, it's not to say that not every kid's built to play rugby. You know what I'm saying, but there needs to be some kind of there has to be some kind of challenge, some kind of overcoming. I mean, even like kids that are like boys that are not athletically inclined at all. They would still have to find their own challenge to sort of to overcome
their own way of exposing them to these kind of trials and this kind of
and it's really hard to, because it's a bit nebulous. It's really hard to put a finger on, but there is a passage where you kind of leave your boyhood behind and you take on your manhood.
Absolutely.
But what happens to the boy if he's gone back into the world of mum and women and things like that?
After that traumatic,
is this trauma.
Yep.
So he then goes on, and so he's very reluctant. You'll see, you even see it really early on, even in primary schools.
Yep.
And certainly in early high school and stuff, you see, like in the co-ed school, the boy that will not play with other boys.
Okay.
Will only play with the girls.
Okay.
hang around here because he's endlessly fascinated by the boys and their games, like their roughhouse games and all that kind of stuff, but he won't participate.
Okay.
He'll watch.
Okay.
He'll watch. Why? Because his masculinity inside's constantly calling him to, look, that's kind of where you're supposed to be. But because he's got this triggered shame response that's within him, he's already subconsciously thinking, I'm not, masculine enough to be out there doing that thing. Yeah. And then he'll have to. But then what will often happen is that then, I should know. So when puberty kicks in, then something very interesting happens. So puberty kicks in, right? And instead of his puberty sort of throwing him or pushing him towards what is other to him, like women, it actually pushes him to what is psychologically other to him, which is men. Because remember, he's been staying psychologically over here in the world of in the feminine world. Okay. And so now that the problem is that attraction to the masculine, which just comes out of his own natural God-given desire to be a man, because that is the way he has been made. Suddenly, that can become eroticized. Okay. Oh wow. Yeah. So when puberty sort of kicks in, if he has a masculine inferiority complex on the cusp of puberty, and when that kicks in, then there can be a real danger then of that desire to be, as one with the guys. Okay. Can become eroticized. Okay. And they confuse, and they conflate their sexual desire with actually the deep emotional need for masculine affirmation, love, and support. Okay. And I suppose this kind of gets right down to the absolute, what's at the core of same-sex attraction, is that at its heart, it's not a sexual problem. Yep. It's an emotional one. Okay. And the emotions run deeper than the mere sexual side of things. Okay. And any attempt that anyone who's been involved in like when there are plenty of guys who are same-sex attracted who approach therapists wanting to be healed. Wanting to be healed, or wanting to get some kind of heterosexual attraction back. It always involves them going back and confronting those original emotional wounds that are under there. Okay. So very often it's what the therapists call the father wound. Okay. That's there. There's another version of the father wound, which is also often called the sports wound. Oh. Now the sports wound is pretty simple. There's as I said, second after a father, the next most important group are the peers, male peers. Okay. And it's really, really important. Yep. And sometimes if a kid is relentlessly bullied and picked on by his peers, they can actually counteract an otherwise good relationship the boy might have with his father. Likewise, and vice versa, you will have a boy who nevertheless gets a lot of affirmation and encouragement and stuff from his peers can also help counteract the bad effects of a relationship with a father who's otherwise... And that can help? It can help, yeah. Okay. So, because... take for example, this was I don't have any concrete studies to hand, but it was certainly talked about by some of the therapists that I was reading about or that I was studying. That, for instance, like African American boys. Yep. In that community there is a real crisis of fatherhood. Yep. There's a lot of absent dads. There's a lot of boys single parent families. A lot of boys growing up not knowing who their dad is. Yep. There's a lot of violent and abusive dads, is a real problem
Yep.
with fatherhood, and a lot of young boys that weren't getting that love and affirmation.
Yeah.
But what they were also finding was that many of these boys would wind up in all-male gangs.
Okay.
And the gangs, as bad as they were,
Yep.
were nevertheless giving these boys the male affirmation, encouragement, support, and love
That they were never
they
getting.
were never getting at home.
That's all making sense now.
Which is why most of them, which is why there's very, very low incidences of same-sex attraction.
Because it was being supplemented.
Because it was in a certain way being supplemented.
That's interesting that you say that, because as you were bringing up that scenario, I was thinking to myself, but would studies amongst those African American communities show high incidence of homosexual deviation or attraction? And I would be thinking no. But now that you said it's because they were getting that affirmation from their peers, and that's the reason why it was probably preventing that.
Well, I think it was certainly helping, definitely.
But also, to kind of support what you're saying as well, is that also the reason why they would be more inclined to committing crimes, is because now that they were involved within these gangs who they saw as older brothers or as father figures that were affirming them, they'd be more willing to do whatever it took to maintain those relationships?
Yeah, you'd have to say that dynamic would be there, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
Because you don't want to be out.
Yeah.
You don't want to be out. I mean, if the gang is your family, it's your home, it's your...
It's where you're getting your love.
It's where you're getting, as poor as it may be,
Yep.
they still perceive something real that they're getting that they weren't getting at home.
That's right.
So they, and there's also that need to fit in.
As well.
That's so important.
Well, I was listening to this is years ago, back when I first came over to the faith, and there was a psychologist that I was listening to on a CD that speaks about environmental factors with same-sex attraction. And he mentioned something else. I don't know whether you've read up on it, but it also it marries up with what you're saying at the moment. He said that a negligent or an absent father plays a factor, but also an overbearing mother. So I can see how, if the father's negligent, or the father's absent, or the father's abusive, and he's not affirming his son, he'll go to the mother. But also, if the mother is a little bit too maybe overbearing and too motherly, it might effeminize the boy in a way, and maybe it might.
Well, I mean, it can even be taken to the extreme where the boy feels so suffocated by an overbearing mother that he's turned off women.
Turned off women. Yeah, that's actually what he said as well. Yeah, because he feels so suffocated by the overbearingness of his mother. He'll go and he'll look for, he won't be attracted to women anymore, and he'll develop an attraction in males because of that repellentness that the mother they can certainly be a factor. Okay.
And I say with each individual person, I mean, you may have I've given a whole array of stuff. I mean, it could be an abusive father and an overbearing mother, and then you often do have, when you do have an abusive father, it's quite often on the other side that you do have a clingy mother.
A clingy mother.
Because especially if dad is not providing the emotional love and support to the mother, then very often mum will lean on the nearest male that she's got
to get that,
which is the son.
Okay, so there's something going on there as well.
And they will lean on their kids in terms of unburdening themselves emotionally. In a way that shouldn't happen with there are burdens that children are not meant to carry.
Okay.
I mean, to a certain degree, as kids, we all deal with our parents' stuff. We live in the same house, and they're trying to raise us, so of course we do.
But only to a certain extent.
But to a certain degree, I mean, there are the deep, the most private stuff that goes on in our parents' hearts as children. Much of that we shouldn't be privy to.
That's right.
You know, that's stuff that our parents need to sort out themselves, or with their spiritual director, or whoever they're seeing.
Yep.
For us kids, for our own, we're not meant to be the like the pillars supporting.
That's right. We're too young.
Yeah, you become too young. But children, because they naturally love, their parents. I mean, what's the boy going to do if Mum starts a boy? He feels like I got to support her.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you have to do that.
But I can definitely see how these experiences would trigger a variety of different responses in children, and can incline them towards certain dispositions, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Continue. So.
Yeah. So
puberty.
So puberty kicks in. So the boy finds himself, now kind of for the first time experiencing this thing where. Like he may have even pre-puberty have experienced like that he really likes boys. Like, I mean, it hasn't, fully...
But like in a friendship kind of way?
Yeah, but that there's something that he just finds a very, kind of like... Well, it's a prepubescent sort of attraction. I don't know how to put it, because it's not fully sexual. But,
that's right.
But it's on the...
It's on the verge.
It's on the verge. It's on the verge. So you can have sort of, when you've got a boy that's sort of like 11, 12... that has a masculine inferiority complex, is afraid of being out there associating with the other boys, is much more comfortable with the girls, is very perhaps highly sensitive, and then maybe, but not necessarily, but maybe effeminate in his mannerisms and things like that. You could say that what we have there is a boy who is pre-homosexual.
Okay.
So he's not there yet. He's not there yet.
Yep.
But he's got all the
indicators.
Signs, all the indicators.
Okay.
And that if there isn't some kind of, if he doesn't get some kind of affirmation, or if there isn't some kind of intervention of some point, then it's going to be quite difficult.
Okay.
He makes that natural transition to being a post-pubescent male is going to be harder
with homosexual tendencies.
To not have those tendencies is going to be harder. Okay,
Yep.
So we all, I mean not we all, but we all know, like when puberty kicks in, especially with guys, once it gets in, it's kind of like this hormonal volcanoes gone off inside of us, and it could all of a sudden they can really start raging.
Absolutely.
And there wouldn't be any guy that has gone through a normal puberty development that doesn't suddenly discover that their mind is racing with all kinds of fantasies. That there's all kinds of it's just going off in there. Absolutely. And there's all kinds of stuff that's going through your head. Okay, so now what happens is that for a boy that's maybe pre-homosexual, that then puberty kicks in, then the fantasies and stuff start coming. Well, then he'll start discovering, maybe he finds that he's got an erotic attraction to men, either boys or older men, whatever. And actually, it's sort of for either another discussion or a bit later, but one of the things that goes on with therapy is also determining what type of guy the person with same-sex attraction is into. Okay. And why, and what they're looking for in their relationship. And a lot of that will be determined by those very early experiences.
There's going to be a connection there
that they had going on. Okay. Yeah. So there will be a connection. Wow. And so what happened, and this is where if the guy has a good, and they often, they often do, the guy's maybe has a good spiritual life, or he's trying to have a bit of a spiritual life, or at least maybe say he's a Catholic and he wants to live his faith. Yep. But he's discovering all these things. Yep. Maybe he starts opening up to his confessor or things and starts talking about them. Yep. He has to, what's really important then is he, like anyone would, even a straight kid, would then have to very quickly start learning that you don't just let your mind run riot. Okay. Like there's a tremendous, even from a psychological point of view, there's a tremendous
danger,
wisdom in learning to control the imagination.
Yeah. But there's also a danger
But there's a real danger in just allowing things to go, because the more those fantasies are allowed to run, and in particular, in particular, if these these burgeoning homoerotic attractions are now acted out upon, especially through gay porn and masturbation. Initially, that's usually the gateway to before you act out with anybody else.
Because it's easy to access.
Very easy to access, and you know. So once they start doing that, if that boy starts to really indulge in those things and really engage in those things, then it starts to lock in that orientation.
Wow.
You see, very often though, and because I've sort of described things in a black and white sort of a way. The reality is that whole push-pull with mum and dad and everything like that, and then the shame response and all that kind of stuff, it's a lot more messy. And very often, even a kid that's had all those things, when their puberty kicks in, when the puberty kicks in, they will go through periods where they feel like more or less heterosexual and attracted to women, and then they'll have periods where they swing back to being homosexual. In fact, for when we first kick in, especially if there's been some kind of emotional instability, even from very well-meaning parents, you know, but there's been some kind of emotional instability or whatever that's caused some trauma back there, then the old orientation needle is often swinging backwards and forwards. It can be quite violent sometimes, and going backwards and forwards where the guy might feel attracted only to women, and then only to men, and other times to both.
Wow,
you know, like everyone.
That's so confusing.
Yeah, and it's really confusing. Yeah, absolutely, it's really confusing. And what you notice, and what's universal, especially in Western countries, with the gay lobby, is that they push, and especially with pernicious programs like the Safe Schools program and things like that, is that they want to sexualize kids as young as possible, because they know that if they can get and encourage a boy who's like pre-homosexual, like swinging sort of that way, if they can get him to act out on those homosexual fantasies and say, look, it's a good thing, you need to explore it, this is healthy for you, you keep going it, well, you're sending him down a path where basically any latent heterosexual attraction that he's got in there is going to be strangled.
Wow.
It's going to be strangled, and he is going to hardwire, because we know as guys, we've been very visual. We look at porn. We look at porn, it burns those images into our retina, into our mind. And especially when we're young.
Yes.
As teenagers, you know, when we're all hormones and everything like that, and maybe seeing this stuff for the first time. You know, those first experiences of looking at porn and things like that, they're powerful. You don't tend to forget those images. Like they're kind of like burned. They're really burned in.
Absolutely.
So they if he's like indulging continuously in homoerotic fantasies and things, well, then that is going to lock it more and more, and he's making these chemical connections between what his eyes see, what his brain feels, and everything. That's like he's training himself to.
And they're so vulnerable at that age.
They're so vulnerable.
Yeah, they're
so vulnerable. And the thing is that you'll find often with the gay lobby, or in general you'd say the rainbow flag lobby, is that they want you to lock in to that identity as early as possible.
Okay.
It's like as soon as you start feeling some kind of like same-sex attraction, you need to identify as gay.
That's
like, I mean, that's the drive. You need to identify as gay.
And it's because they understand.
They get it. Look, because if you can get them identifying as gay and locking themselves into that, into that, and then they've got them.
And then, because then they truly believe that they are that orientation.
They have that orientation.
But they just don't realize
that they are condemned to having that. I mean, that's the way they might see it, but that they are going to have this.
Because I know from what I've read about the Safe Schools program, I haven't read anything about it recently, but they're trying to expose kids to sexual material as young as 6 and 7 years old.
which is wicked. I mean,
it's a form of abuse.
Well,
isn't
it
it
is. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't have, and don't want to get political, but
Yep.
you can't have on one hand governments getting in a rage, a justifiable rage, about pedophilia,
Yep.
and especially the horrible scandal of pedophilia that happened in the church and stuff, and then
Yep.
really whacking the church
Yep.
for it. Okay, fair enough. And then at the same time, pushing programs that expose the children of the same age as or younger than the kids who are abused to explicit sexual material, stuff that's sexual way beyond what they use. You can't. I mean, it's an incredible double standard.
Yeah, which is a form of abuse within itself, which is what makes it a double standard. You're right.
It's a form of abuse in itself.
Absolutely.
So no, you can't.
Okay.
So that's really important. Is that there are stages. We're not meant to experience things before a certain time.
Okay.
Until we can be not just physically but also emotionally and psychologically ready.
Okay.
For them.
Now, I don't want to get off on a tangent, and just tell me like that. We'll save this for later on. I'm hearing that. Is it possible then? Because you were saying that when people have therapy later, I've heard stories, or I've heard that it's very hard for a person once he's entrenched in a certain orientation, that the therapy doesn't do anything. And I heard for a lot of people who have experienced or have tried to go through therapy, it's kind of been like torture for them. Even though I have heard of success stories and that it's worked, but for a lot of the time I heard that it hasn't.
Yeah.
Would you like to comment on that?
Sure. Look, I mean, the incidence of someone having a total reorientation where, say, a guy is no longer attracted to men and only attracted to women. The incidence of that happening is very small.
Okay.
But where you would have a much higher incidence of, success, if you will, would be men who, for instance, had out of control homoerotic desires or behaviour.
Yep.
And were able, one, to get themselves back to a place where they could live chastity,
okay,
while still having the orientation,
yeah,
but able to live chastity, because the potency or the power of those attraction desires had been quelled.
Now, also another thing that just came to my mind now that I wanted to ask you about, and I wanted to see what your thoughts and how you felt about this. The way that you're speaking now about this topic, it's as though it is a deviation. There are underlying conditions and certain predispositions and environmental factors. And therapists have acknowledged this.
Yeah.
But now, within the current climate, it's like we're not allowed, from a secular point of view, we're not allowed to see homosexuality as a sexual deviation or as an abnormality. So any therapy that would purport, or that would have the aim of trying to treat homosexuality, wouldn't that be seen as not just wrong, but as anti-science, or it wouldn't be seen as therapy itself? Like there probably wouldn't it be dangerous for people to practice that kind of therapy without being hammered by anti-discrimination boards or by
you already
by the
see
gay
it.
by the gay lobby?
You've got several jurisdictions in Australia that are either seeking to or have outlawed what they would term, or we would even term, reparative therapy.
Yeah, so that's what it's called?
Yeah, so it's called, yeah. So basically the two main camps are reparative therapy, which is someone with same-sex attraction who wants to try and be, to be straight.
Yep.
And then the other camp is gay affirmative therapy, or GAT. Yeah, which is basically which affirms the sexual orientation completely, and would see any psychological neuroses or any other problem that the person may have as being what they would tell as a direct result of feelings of discrimination or anti-gay sentiment and things. But I mean, the irony is that these neuroses and everything are still just as common in gay people who live in the most liberal countries.
Yeah, that's
as
true.
they are with people who live in countries that may not be so tolerant.
Well, what you've been saying is very interesting. So this isn't about just gender identity. This woundedness that this person experiences when he's growing up in this situation, it goes deeper. Can you just fill me in on?
Sure. Well, I mean, we've seen with, for instance, a lot of the, if you like, the rainbow flag movement that's been happening, that we saw especially around the same-sex marriage plebiscite that we had a couple of years ago. Except there are a lot of groups marching under that banner. But same-sex attraction is different from people. It's a different issue compared to people suffering from, say, gender dysphoria. So like boys wanting to be girls, girls wanting to be boys.
Yep.
One of the aches that's there, especially for, say, guys or girls who have same-sex attraction. So the boy or the man, he knows he's a man. Like he doesn't question that. Yep. He's a bloke. He knows that. He doesn't want to be a woman. I mean, and I'm even talking about even some of the guys that get up in drag.
Yep.
You know, and drag queens that perform, like they know they're men. They're not. They're not asking for a sex change operation. The pain that they feel though is that even though they know they're men, but they don't feel man enough around other guys, and they don't perhaps feel man enough in their own way around women.
Okay.
In the sense that when they are around, like a guy who's a straight guy, when he's around women, well, I mean, even just think about when perhaps we were idiotic, teenagers and stuff, when we're around girls, like our voices start to get a bit deep, we start to stick our chests out a bit, we're like peacocks, sort of like strutting about, doing our thing. It's like, look how manly I am, that sort of thing. Well, I mean, there's that sort of, when you have that masculine inferiority complex that's sort of underneath, well, you don't feel you can do that. Like you don't put yourself out there in front of women to try and be attractive to them by displaying your masculine characteristics or whatever. Why? Because deep down you don't feel that you've got enough of them, or you're worthy of them, and that's part of the pain. And so when seeking like the company or a sexual encounter with other men, and this would be something to talk about later, perhaps if we have an episode 2.
Which we are going to, because keep going.
Because I gas bag a lot. I go on for a long time.
No, but you've said a lot of good things, Father. Okay, and we definitely gonna have to. So we definitely have to do a part 2 because we haven't covered enough. So, but keep going anyway.
So. These guys, so when they have a sexual encounter, say with other men, well, in that moment that's happening, they do experience the sensation, which is ultimately an illusion, that they possess the masculinity that they feel that they lack, that they experience the love that they feel that was denied them, that they perhaps, depending on how the psychological genesis was in them, how that they might be dominating the masculinity that they or owning it, or submitting to it.
Because let me stop you there, Father. I'm going to get a little bit controversial, but I think it's important anyway. I've heard that there is a connection and there is a correlation between, and I don't know whether your studies have shown this in your thesis, between sexual abuse and same-sex attraction or homosexuality. Yeah. Is that why you're mentioning this form of medicating through same-sex encounters?
Sure. Well, I mean, the sexual abuse there is a definite correlation, but it's one factor. Okay. It's not. I mean, there are plenty of.
It's not the factor.
It's not the factor. I mean, there would be plenty of. I mean, I wouldn't say the majority of people who have
been sexually abused.
Who are involved in the gay lifestyle, and so there are many who weren't sexually abused as kids, but but through other reasons that we've talked about have wound up that way. But yes, definitely, and especially when you have men abusing boys, that there would seem to be a high correlation then in those boys when they get older, then acting out in a homosexual way with other guys.
Okay.
And there could be, and there's all kinds of reasons perhaps for that. And it can be sense of, what we've seen, especially like with the Royal Commission and the tragedy after tragedy that has unearthed. You see how messed up and wounded people become after having experienced that trauma. Hence, again, it's another reason why you shouldn't have, be exposing kids to needless and far too explicit sexual material. So like with safe schools and things like that. Like that would be a disaster. But that those experiences that they had, they can sometimes question themselves and think, well, did I somehow deep down, was there a part of me that wanted it? Was there a part of me that enjoyed it? They can tear them apart. And perhaps after even having that experience, there could also be a sense of feeling, well, I'm so dirty that I might not, that this is the only sexual encounter that I'm worthy of. Okay. That can be another factor that's in there.
It belittles them.
It can belittle them, and then there can be. There can also sometimes just be the anger and aggression that they're taking out, that they're just going to do to others what was done to them.
Okay,
there can be that factor too.
Okay.
But yes, there's a definite link.
And so with these encounters, these same-sex encounters, you were speaking about it earlier with me. How are they oriented? Like when two males, they come together, for example, you said something about, or when I was speaking to you earlier, about it being narcissistic or those encounters. What did you mean by that?
Okay, well, the narcissism is it's a neuroses really that is very common. It's a very strong trait in the homosexual orientation or within it, and that comes to that has its origin back in the fact. So the person's been wounded, and one of the defense mechanisms. When we're hurting. When we're hurting, we have to defend ourselves. We want to medicate. Well, we want to protect so that the pain will stop. And one of the ways that we do it is that, and one of the ways that's very common, especially with guys that have been wounded in this way, is that they then will often see themselves, that they will take comfort or refuge in their victim status.
Okay.
And I've been careful how I use it. I'm not doing that in an accusatory sort of way.
No, definitely.
But it's a safe place. I've been wounded. I've been wronged.
Okay.
And there can be a tendency also, because these are deep emotional wounds that happened at a young and vulnerable age, that they can, when they develop, when puberty kicks in, that while they physically develop, maybe normally, and even intellectually, and intellectually they develop perfectly normally, and some of the finest, and most on top of their game professionals in the world are same-sex attracted.
Okay.
Doctors, lawyers, engineers, whatever, artists, musicians, absolutely world class on top of their game. But are same-sex attracted, but inside them, inside themselves, beneath all their professional brilliance and whatever, still remain a wounded little boy.
Okay.
And all of that that raw that raw pain and sensitivity has never sort of truly gone away.
Okay.
And I said one of those defense mechanisms is to see myself. Well, yes, I'm the victim. I've been wounded. I've suffered all these things, and it can become a very soothing sort of purring kind of a thing. And we can see ourselves, as the tragic. They can see themselves as the tragic center of the universe, sort of thing. That can really kind of be a prism through which they view themselves.
Okay.
And so there's that, so there's that narcissistic, that trait that can be there. But then if you look at, okay, well then some of the acts themselves, you know, without going into them, well, look, heterosexual sex is in and of itself oriented towards something greater than the couple. Because of its connection, fundamental connection with new life, and the fact that it involves the giving and receiving of something utterly unique and unrepeatable, which is, for example, you as a unique and unrepeatable man offering your unique and unrepeatable seed to, you know, your wife. That's something that's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, only you can be the father of your children, and only your wife can be the mother of her children. So that's it. I mean, there's a real offering of something. No such offering takes place in homosexual sex. In fact, the fundamental, I mean, you can go about heterosexual sex in a narcissistic way, don't get me wrong. You can certainly, you know, you can certainly be a narcissist in the act, but the act itself is not narcissistic. Okay. And that's the beauty. Whereas homosexual sex, it is so much about the other person satisfying me. Because there is no, it's absolutely completely sterile for a start. It can't go anywhere greater than the couple, and it sort of basically has to involve a dynamic of, like, you know, you do me and then I'll do you. Okay. Sort of a thing.
Now, is there an emotional connection with those sexual acts for the male, or are they trying to medicate against that emotional trauma from when they were younger? Because you were speaking about, for example,
in the sense, like, are they using it as a genuine expression of love? Because the connection that I'm trying to draw from this is
with that male who is now post-pubescent. He's now at a stage in his life where he's going to start experimenting, or he's going to start acting out his these thoughts, or this deviation that he has, but he's doing it because of the lack of affirmation that he had from his father,
potentially,
when he was younger, and because he was retreating to his mother. This is where the rubber hits the road, and where he is now in a position where he's going to have these encounters. Is there anything that he's trying to medicate against in and through these encounters? Like, I think you did touch on it before. Is he?
Well, you get.
Is
the
he
thing
looking
is,
for that love?
sense, in the sense that he's given in those encounters, he gets that feeling. That feeling that he does have the male love, or he perceives in the moment that he has the male love that perhaps he lacked, or whatever. Yep. But then you get, but the problem is when it's all over, it's like the veil is pulled off the illusion, and he's left feeling just as empty as he was before. Okay. Which is why you need to keep acting out again and again and again, and often why we won't have time to go into it now. But for instance, why promiscuity in the male homosexual community is through the roof in comparison even to, you know, the heterosexual community.
And can you touch on just briefly why they're so promiscuous amongst males?
Especially why amongst males, it's because the encounter itself, like I said before, is it's fundamentally about me satisfying my needs. I mean, that's just from that person's point of view. It's like me satisfying my needs. Yep. And I'm trying to satisfy my own emptiness, essentially out of the emptiness of somebody else. Okay. Who's has basically got an emotional wound quite similar. Okay. You know, the person would be like, oh, they've got an emotional wound quite similar to me, sort of thing. And when they don't realize, I mean, they're not thinking that, but that's actually what's happening. So it's kind of an exercise in futility. Okay. I mean, in the midst of it all, I mean, they're also wanting, like everybody else, I mean, they're wanting to have that special someone, that you know, that person that they can love, and so in the midst of it, in the midst of all of that thing, you've also got that real desire, and this is what it all comes down to. It's a love wound. They want to feel, and they want to be loved, and they want to give love too. It's just the problem is that the way in which it's happening doesn't allow the full beauty and potential of the love that they have within them to be able to be expressed.
Okay.
And I suppose this would be perhaps the best way to close, at least, is that always have to remember is that why have we been put on this earth? We've been made by love, for love, and ultimately to live in loving union with God for all eternity. That's why we're here. And same-sex attraction, well, people, they have a love wound. They're wounded in their I suppose in their ability to love in a particular way, especially in a sexual way. So when we're looking at it, you have to remember that we're always dealing with people. We're dealing with a person. I mean, it's not, you can't just look at the condition, and while, we may have varying degrees of, perhaps being maybe even repulsed by some of the behaviour and stuff that goes on. You have to remember that behind that behaviour, though, is a person that's trying to be loved.
That's right.
Or wanting to be loved.
Someone who's in pain.
Someone, And any kind of pastoral approach and psychological care has to recognise that we're always treating people and looking after people, and and that's essentially what the gospel is about, and Catholic apologetics, missionary work is all ultimately helping people to come to an encounter with the truth, who is love. And in the light of that truth, being able to see our own weaknesses and woundedness, not be crushed by it, because when we see everything through the light of Christ's love shines a true light onto where we're wounded. It does not pretend that what's not wrong, that what's wrong is right. It holds it up in the light of the truth, but it doesn't let us be destroyed by it. And here's the thing, is that any kind of pastoral work that we do has to acknowledge that homosexual loving, or sexual that homosexual loving is not a fully authentic expression of our sexuality. But at the same time, any treatment or any approach that we have of dealing with these people has to also be with the constant affirmation that they are loved. And what's more, that they that they can be called to and become, the greatest lovers that God has made them to be. So what we're ultimately about is the business of hope.
Awesome.
That's the thing. So,
well, thank you for coming on, Father. There's going to be a part 2 because you've still got a lot more to talk about. So we're going to be talking about a couple of. We're going to be, I guess, pretty much continuing where we left off from now. It's been like my mind has been blown away by everything that you've been speaking about. I've learned so much. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you. So you better keep to your word. You're coming back on, okay? Guys, thank you for tuning to another week of Couch Catechism. I'm your host, Michael Obeid from Voracious Media. Please don't forget to like and share this, as well as the fact that when it goes onto YouTube as well, like and share and subscribe to Voracious Media. Once again, I'm your host, Michael Obeid from Couch Catechism. God bless, see you later, and keep the faith.
Hi, I'm Father Daniel Russo, and I'm here with the team of Voracious Media. What's fantastic about this initiative is that it's an Australian-based catechetical resource. In other words, it's our Catholics right here at home who are teaching us about Jesus Christ in an uncompromised way. We're learning the fullness of the truth and nothing less. We're also supporting our local priests, nuns, and laymen and women and empowering them to be educators in the faith, to be evangelizers. So by supporting this initiative, you're supporting the church in our country. So get on board and support Veracious Media.